A very good evening. Time then for the press preview. It's our first look at the front pages of tomorrow's papers. And checking out the headlines tonight, I'm joined by the broadcaster and former government minister, Anna Soubry, and the PR consultant, Alex Deane. A very good evening to both of you. They'll be with us, of course, until just before midnight. So let's have a look at some of the front pages then. We're going to start with the Eye, reporting that Boris Johnson protected the former Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher, who was today suspended by the Conservative Party after being accused of groping two men on a night out. And the Daily Mail also goes with the story about Mr Pincher. So too does the Guardian, as you can see. Now, the Times reports on a new claim against the now independent MP, which he denies. The Daily Telegraph leads on plans by airlines to cancel flights next week, causing more chaos for tens of thousands of passengers planning to go on a summer holiday. The FT focuses on a warning from Ryanair, whose chief executive says air travellers face years of rising prices because tickets have become too cheap. The Express reports Boris Johnson is backing what it calls revolutionary plans to tackle the nation's housing crisis. And for reasons best known to themselves, the Star tells us about a missing pigeon. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you can see on your screen throughout the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And to discuss them, I am joined now by Anna Soubry and Alex Deane. Very good to see you this Friday evening. Thanks for joining us. And Anna, let's kick off then with this extraordinary story about Chris Pincher. Things seemed to begin fairly well yesterday evening when he resigned. The first we heard of it pretty much was when that letter was released offering his resignation. But then things turned a little bit sticky, didn't they, for Boris Johnson?
Yes, and to me, the real story in this is actually the way that it has been so badly mishandled by the Prime Minister. And of course, he has history on that. Look, I knew Chris Pincher first of all, in 2010. And all I will say, well, two things. First of all, these are allegations when it comes to groping and touching, and those are serious allegations. They should be properly investigated, and frankly, not necessarily by the media, but actually by either the investigation operation that there is in the House of Commons or by the police. And everybody, frankly, is innocent until such time as they are proven guilty. But I mean, I have to say this. I mean, you know, my own view of Chris is that he's a troubled soul. And I hope that it will be understood that, you know, there's a good argument he needs some serious support through all of this because this is serious stuff. But as I say, the real thing is the way it was being mishandled by Boris Johnson. It's a serious allegation. And there were two Tory MPs, senior Conservative women, who quite rightly said earlier on today that Johnson should have taken action immediately and suspended the whip from him whilst this matter was properly investigated. And yet again, it's another cock-up. And this overprotection and not dealing with things properly actually causes more of a storm for Boris Johnson than the actual allegation of sleaze, if you like, yet again involving a Conservative MP.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point, isn't it? If the whip had been withdrawn straight away, then Boris Johnson would have taken credit for that. And, of course, he's now lost the opportunity to have credit for something which inevitably he did 24 hours later. And Anna, I'll get Alex's view in a moment, but just very quickly, when the Prime Minister's spokesman says that the PM wasn't aware of any specific complaints made against Mr Pincher before he gave him this job as Deputy Chief Whip, do you believe that?
Well, it's not a question of whether I believe it or not. I find it quite extraordinary. It may be a mark of the Prime Minister that he's just not interested in this sort of thing. Look, the role of the whips, of course, is party discipline, but there's also another role, which is the welfare. And there has been, yet again, a profound dereliction of duty towards other members of Parliament, staff, and indeed people who may have done something very seriously wrong. There is a duty of care. But Chris has had problems, in my view, for a long time. And those problems should have been addressed and he should have been supported and helped. And he should never have been made Deputy Chief Whip. And I'm astonished if Boris Johnson's team didn't know about those difficulties. OK,
plenty more analysis in The Guardian. Their headline questions for Johnson as Tory Whip suspended. Alex, Number 10 is saying that they acted quickly once a formal complaint had been made. So he resigned. Nothing else happened until a formal complaint was made. And that's when Number 10 say they jumped in and decided to remove the whip whilst the investigation takes place. I mean, is that not fair enough?
Yeah, you're right on the chronology, and let's just be clear about what the sets of accusations are. Chris Pincher tonight faces three sets of issues or problems or allegations. The first being that he was so drunk he couldn't control himself, which he admits in his letter of resignation to the Prime Minister. The second is of groping at the venue, and he has been silent on that. His letter doesn't address that. And the third is a new allegation about inappropriate behaviour on the front of the Times, which his lawyers have firmly denied. So there are those three different allegations. When it came to the first one about the Chris Pincher being drunk and incapable, there's some of what Anna said I disagree with, but I agree with her completely about Chris Pincher. He is indeed, I think her phrase troubled soul is a very good one, and I would venture to say it was pretty widely known in the Westminster Village. So I agree with some of what she says, including the point about having a duty of care to people who find themselves under the spotlight in these circumstances. That is not in any way to diminish the importance of this to people who are or may be his victims. There is a duty of care to Chris Pincher now too. But the where I might disagree with Anna slightly, and it's not, I know she and I have discussed the Prime Minister's merits or faults many times, but this is not actually, in my view, just about the Prime Minister. I think there is a systemic problem in Westminster with people who face challenges in their lives like this. Most responsible employers will say, we'll look after you, we'll take care of you, don't go back to your desk, you're not going to do any more work. And in Westminster, the situation across the parties and institutionally is the reverse. This situation is, we think you're an idiot, you've let everyone down, now get back and fight another election, carry on.
I mean, that is a very good point, Anna, isn't it? You know, in any other large organisation, there'd be a proper HR department, there'd be 360-degree reviews, there'd be structure, there'd be a complaints procedure, there'd be that duty of care. But as you well know, having spent a lot of time there, that structure simply doesn't exist.
Yeah, but it's not just in Parliament. Let's get this clear. I mean, it might be in great organisations like the one you work for, I don't know. But there are many businesses across our country where there are all sorts of sexual assaults going on, largely women who are being sexually bullied effectively, and so on and so forth, which we often don't talk about. That doesn't excuse Parliament, because Parliament should be a shining beacon of how you do things right. I agree with you. In fact, we do agree, don't we, Alex, that there is a duty of care and there is a dereliction of duty of care. But let's be very clear about this. I can't believe that Boris Johnson wasn't told that, as I put it, Chris Pincher was a troubled soul. And the problem here is that Boris Johnson appointed him as his deputy chief whip for no other reason than he'd been loyal to Boris Johnson and organised some big dog rescue mission when Boris Johnson was under attack quite properly. And instead of him doing the right thing and resigning, he's clinging on.
OK, we're going to go to the break shortly, and I just want to squeeze this story in before we do that. On the front of the Telegraph, Alex, I mean, we're going to see this headline every day, I think, aren't we? More holiday chaos predicted as airlines axe more flights.
Rotten news for travellers, but the thing about this, Jonathan, is that at least people know in advance. What government's now requiring these airlines to do is to cancel flights they know aren't going to go. And perhaps because they're concerned about losing slots if they announce that far enough in advance, perhaps because they're living on a dream that the flight might just possibly go, or if they keep you dangling, you won't cancel your ticket, or you might have fewer rights if your flight isn't cancelled. They're not telling people right up until the day. So it's absolutely vital that airlines tell people if their flights aren't going to go. I know it's really depressing to see a headline like this, but it is better to know your flight's going to be cancelled than to be kept dangling in the way that some people have been kept dangling for the last month.
Yeah, I mean, terrible scenes over the last few days we've seen. Anna, quick thought from you on this?
Well, it's a cock-up, isn't it? And I'm sorry, but some of that responsibility must be with government, because this was all predicted. It must have been anticipated. And I wish more had been done. And that includes by the airlines themselves. I just feel sorry for all those people who haven't had a holiday because of COVID and were looking forward to a break this summer. And frankly, I think lots of people are thinking, oh, God, I'm just going to stay at home and pray to goodness that we have a great British summer, because the prospect of being stuck in an airport or flights cancelled, Absolutely ghastly. I do feel sorry for people who've not had a holiday, especially those people who worked so brilliantly on the front line through the COVID pandemic.
Third year of staycations. The good news is the weather is improving next week, Annie. You'll be pleased to know. We're going to have a few nice days. Coming up, plenty more to discuss. With a 32% increase in COVID cases in the past week, have we become complacent about the pandemic? I wonder. We'll be discussing that in a moment. Welcome back to the press preview. Anna and Alex are still with us. Alex, COVID cases are going up rather dramatically. Highest level since April. 2.3 million people are thought to have had it last week.
And we will all know people who are caught up in this new wave. I know anecdote it isn't the same as statistics, but gosh, I know many more people who've got it in this wave than in previous waves. The important thing to mention that in that too, though, is that hospital admission rates are not rising like anything like so much as they were in the last waves. And I learned this morning as I was listening to the NHS reports that a majority of people in hospital who do have COVID are in hospital because they're being treated for something else. So this is serious, and it's in part to blame for the story we were discussing before the break about lack of staff in transport systems, because if you test positive, then you can't go to work under the current regulations. But it is better. I'm not being totally complacent, but it is better than we've had it in the past.
Yeah, Anna, it's these Omicron subvariants. They just seem to be hanging around, don't they?
Yeah, it's 1 in 30, isn't it? Have got it in England. I think it's 1 in 18 in Scotland, and this rise of about 34% seems to be across the United Kingdom. I mean, I just think we just all have to be just aware of it, keeping an eye. But I mean, I did some filming earlier this week, and I was quite surprised that everybody was wearing a mask, whether they were being overly cautious. Because, you've got people who you've got to have the continuity, you've got to have somebody who, has to go off and isolate and so on. I don't know, because in the rest of the world, it just, in our country anyway, it just seems like it's not gone away, but we're almost back to normal. And I mean, I think that's good news, but we just keep an eye on it. That must be right. Yeah,
and I guess as long as those NHS numbers stay steady, then things are OK, isn't it? We'll just squeeze this one in as well, Alex, front of the Daily Express. There's not a lot of detail here. Just explain this one to us.
The government has a plan to allow people to effectively pass on a mortgage. So you have a multi-generational mortgage. Facing the enormous problem we've got getting people onto the housing ladder, this is a pretty smart attempt to think about things outside of the box. On the other hand, one might point out we are not building enough homes. And as long as that remains the case, the question will still be, what are they going to buy?
Anna?
He's right on that. I just think it's a bit of a gimmick, isn't it? I mean, the problem is actually, as Alex says, we have a problem with not building enough houses. I didn't think it was access to mortgages. And of course, call me old-fashioned, but I thought you passed on money and assets and good things to your children, not debt. That's what this would be doing.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Imagine that, signing up for a 50-year mortgage. OK, thank you both. We'll speak again in a moment. Right now, we'll take a quick look at the weather.